Welcome to today's global hour-long automotive broadcast. Today's webinar is a joint one between two TechWorks communities, AESIN and the IoT Security Foundation. Now, please bear with me today if I don't sound quite myself. I'm a bit under the weather with a heavy cold, so I'm going to try and get through this as best I can today. Whilst we're waiting for everyone to arrive, I'd like to let you know about the TechWorks Engineering Trustworthy AI initiative. We did an AI webinar this past summer and followed it up with a London workshop. Now, earlier this month, a new paper was published summarizing key findings on 18 perspectives for wider consideration for members of the TechWorks communities, including AESIN and the IoT Security Foundation. If you're watching this broadcast live, you can click on the link, which I'll put in the Zoom chat facility in a few moments. And if you're watching the recording of this webinar, please go to techworks.org.uk/AI, where you can download the new paper and look out for details of the next AI event being announced this next week. Our first guest today joins us from California. He is speaking to us from his plush hotel room, which overlooks a Tesla factory. He is Lee Harrison of Siemens, and he is going to be presenting to us today on software-defined vehicles. After Lee, we'll also hear from Paul Wooderson of Horiba Mira, who will present on hardware security. But now we cross over to Fremont in San Francisco Bay. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Right, so welcome everybody. Let me just get my presentation up. Okay, so the session today, as you know, is talking about the emergence of software-defined vehicles. So what I'm going to talk about in the next 20 minutes is really what is a software-defined vehicle? What does that mean for automotive designers, manufacturers? What are the implications on the electronic hardware that goes into those vehicles? And what do we have to do to make sure that when we're developing these new software-defined vehicles, how do we make them safe, secure, and make sure that they're as reliable as possible? So let me start off by just kind of doing a bit of a trek through history so we can understand exactly what a software-defined vehicle is and how that differs from the vehicles that we're used to today and the overall evolution of cars and how we got there. So if we start off with what we would call vehicle 1.0, so this is everybody's kind of very familiar with the basic car as we know it, that would typically have very simplistic electronics in. It certainly wouldn't be connected. And the electronics in the vehicle was really built on a budget. It wasn't the key kind of value add in the vehicle at all. Then we saw the emergence of more and more electronic content within the design, within the vehicle. And a lot of these features were based around adding convenience to the user and the driver. So you started to see technologies such as sat-nav guidance systems, infotainment systems, and we started to see vehicles getting connected. But primarily this connectivity was aimed at effectively adding a safety net to the vehicle. So if the vehicle was to break down or you were to have an accident, you would have a means to call for help. And that was about the level of the connectivity within the vehicle. If we move to where we are roughly today, so vehicle 3.0, today we see cars where there is an increasing number of features and applications within the electronics content within the vehicle. And there's a willingness to pay for all of this premium technology. So we're now seeing vehicles that are more and more connected, not just from a safety perspective, but from an entertainment perspective, and the ability to leverage a lot of these kind of new features. And then we come on to what's being called the software-defined vehicle. And here we end up with a vehicle that is, it's not just a fixed set of features and capabilities. It's a very dynamic platform, so you can really mold and fit the vehicle to your own personal preferences and lifestyle. And a lot of the features that can be added to this software-based platform can even be delivered in a subscription-based model. So a lot of the features can be paid for on a monthly basis. So, for example, you could do things like pay a monthly subscription to get heated seats during the winter, but then you don't need to pay for those during the summer. So it's a very, very flexible platform. And connectivity is an extremely important part of that overall new platform and development. So that's kind of where we've come from and where we're heading. And if we look at how that really impacts the architecture of the vehicle, if we talk about, let's say, the design cycle of vehicles in kind of yesterday, the hardware and the software would be developed together, and then you'd reach a point where the production of the vehicle would start, and the development of those elements would stop, and then it would be kind of fixed in time. But with the software-defined vehicle, what we find is the hardware gets complete, but the software can be continuously developed throughout the whole life cycle of the vehicle. So essentially, you can have a vehicle where, as you own it, there's more and more features and capabilities being added to that vehicle throughout its life. And that's achieved essentially by, instead of having an architecture within the vehicle that is made up of many, many different ECUs with their own individual functionality, we bring all of the compute power and the delivery of those features into a central compute engine. And this kind of varies a little bit between vehicle architectures. It could be completely central, or we could have I think terminology is a zonal implementation where there's maybe 2 or 3 different compute engines within the design. But what we're essentially doing is centralizing the hardware, and then that hardware can support a lot more flexibility in terms of the software content. And what we see in terms of the hardware is that obviously, just by definition of the name, it's a software-defined vehicle. So unfortunately, there seems to be less attention paid to the hardware. But for a vehicle to be software-defined, it has to be silicon-enabled. So, and if we look at how the silicon and the compute elements of these vehicles is growing over time, you can see here in this graph, as you add all of these additional features and capabilities, the compute power required for that centralized hardware is still today growing exponentially. So, and we expect this to continue for quite some time. So in terms of the hardware, what we're seeing is the requirements are just kind of exploding in terms of the amount of compute power that's needed to drive these software-defined vehicles. What does this mean to the semiconductor industry? Well, here you see a couple of trend lines. The blue trend line is essentially the overall trend in terms of technology node for the leading edge technology in the semiconductor industry. The red line is historically where the automotive industry has sat. And as you can see, back in the kind of early 2000s, the trend for the automotive industry was really to focus on the more mature technologies that brought with them kind of less risk, less cost, and were more than capable of supporting the requirements of the electronics that were going into the vehicles. However, if you look at where we are today, and this graph is a couple of years out of date, we actually have now reached that crossover point where the automotive industry is now driving the leading edge semiconductor technology requirements. So the automotive industry is really driving that leading edge development from a semiconductor perspective, which just in its nature brings a whole bunch of challenges in terms of, like I say, in the past, there was a reliance on maturity. Now the silicon that's going into vehicles is very leading edge. So with that comes a certain amount of risk that we have to try and mitigate, because obviously we still want our vehicles to be 100% safe. So when we're designing ICs, semiconductors for automotive applications, what do we have to think about? So first of all, testability. We want to make sure that the ICs that go into the vehicles are 100% defect free. And the terminology used in the industry is essentially zero defect. So if you're to deliver electronic components into the automotive industry and there are defects and there's a recall that's needed, we all know that a recall for an automotive OEM is a huge cost. So there's a real effort to make sure that silicon that goes into vehicles is essentially defect free. And the terminology we use here is zero defect. And what that means in essence is you'll never achieve zero defects, but we're looking at achieving a target of less than one defect per million devices. And even now that's changed and it's now a billion devices. So really in a delivery of a billion chips, we want less than one of them to be have defects in. So it's a pretty tall ask in terms of quality. Then we have the safety. So in all parts of the vehicle development and automotive, we're all familiar with the various standards to make sure that we're able to detect when faults and defects occur within the vehicle. And if something's going to fail, we need to make sure it fails in a safe state. And then security. Security is becoming more and more important. And as you can imagine, with the amount of software content and features and capabilities being added, the attack space for security is just exploding. So security is a huge topic in the automotive space, and it's a real challenge to get to a point where we cover that attack landscape. And then SLM, lifecycle management. So this is really being able to monitor the various aspects of the silicon throughout the vehicle's life cycle. So making sure that it continues to work as expected. And as with everything else, silicon ages. You're probably used to your mobile phones, your PCs. They all start to get a bit cranky once they get a few years in, and the silicon will age, and it does have an end life. So really making sure that we monitor that and we know when things are going to fail, to make sure that we do preventative maintenance and to make sure that everything's done in a safe and secure way. So by no means developing that hardware that supports the software-defined vehicle, it's not a trivial task. And if we look into some of those elements, so we talked about advanced test techniques, and here's just an example of some of the type of defects that we try and target within the silicon. So here we're talking about really detailed, right down in the depths of the transistors within the silicon itself, looking for kind of opens and short circuits and bridges within the actual silicon itself, and not just faults that are obvious and prevalent when you initially test the device, but defects that could emerge in the early use. So what we try and do is we try and stress the devices during our testing to make sure if there's a defect that's kind of, it's there, but it's not affecting the overall functionality of the device. Initially, we stress the device to make sure that those defects manifest themselves, so we don't see those in the early life of the vehicle. And then we have safety. So I say everybody's probably familiar with the ISO 26262. It really looks out for two parts of the IC development. So you've got the systematic faults. So these are faults that could potentially be introduced during the design manufacture phase. And then most importantly, you've got the detection of random faults. So these are the faults that occur throughout the life cycle of the vehicle, and they could be caused by any number of things, but it's really important to have the mechanisms within the silicon and the semiconductor to be able to detect those faults when they occur, and not just to be able to detect them, but also make sure that once we have detected them, we can take the appropriate action, and if the device is going to fail, we make sure it fails in a safe way. We also have the safety of the intended function. So this is a little bit different in terms of, this is really checking to make sure that the device is being used for what it was actually intended for. So it's quite easy to leverage technology that's designed for one thing and use it in a scenario that it maybe was never intended to be used for. So here we look at that aspect of it and make sure that the vehicle is being used within the bounds of what the technology was initially specified for. And then, like I said, the real challenge in today's development is the ISO 21434, which really looks out for these malicious faults that are coming through cybersecurity attacks, and all of those aspects of the attack surface within the overall system. So what do we do in the world of security to be able to make sure we can detect these type of attacks on the electronic systems, the electronic hardware within the vehicle? So here is a kind of a simplified illustration of the sort of technology that can be used. So the green boxes there, kind of in the middle, are the various functions in, say, a compute subsystem. So you've got CPUs, you've got memories, you've got bus controllers, and then around that, we insert a whole bunch of different monitoring technology. So at the top, you've got things like bus monitors, instruction tracing, status monitors, and these passively monitor the operation of the device. And what we're really looking for here is when the device starts to operate outside of its regular profile. So As you can imagine, with a compute subsystem running a predefined set of software, we know exactly what the profile of that software looks like. So we've got a very good understanding of the sort of transactions we should be seeing, the amount of transactions we should be seeing. So one of the big things in terms of cyber attacks is when there's an attack on the vehicle, especially from the software perspective, we see a lot of anomalies appear in terms of how the compute engine within the vehicle is operating. So these can be detected by these monitors. And then we've got another set of monitors that are down the bottom, which are referred to as sentries. And these, whereas the other monitors are kind of passive monitoring, collecting data, the sentry monitors are really there, and they can be proactive. So, for example, if we see kind of illegal accesses to buses or memory, the sentry devices can actually block that activity there and then. So they can be very proactive and mitigate very quickly. Like I say, very low latency here because these monitors are built into the hardware and they sit right next to the subsystems that they're monitoring. So in terms of the ability to detect and mitigate, practically zero latency. So there's a whole range of things we can do within the hardware to detect and mitigate against these type of cyber attacks. And then obviously with everything, we're all connected now. So one thing we can do with the monitors, the data that we collect, we can extract from the silicon and we can put up into the cloud. And once we've got data from a fleet of vehicles, we can do a whole lot of smart analysis on that and start to use AI to really look at the overall trends of what's happening out there in the world. So with that, let me kind of let's take a bit of a journey and kind of try and show how this technology kind of works in a real life example. So we would take our friend here. He's happy. He's going to work. He's got his software-defined vehicle. So at the start of the journey, he'll start up his vehicle. We do key on. As part of the key on, we do an initial system test. So this is using the inbuilt system test technology, and it will structurally test the silicon to make sure it's defect free. We do that in a very, very quick manner to make sure that you're not sat there waiting for 15 minutes for the vehicle to test itself before you can drive, but be rest assured that we do enough testing on the silicon to make sure it's safe to start your journey. So off we go. And our friend here today, he likes the fact he's got a software-defined vehicle. He's got all these personal settings and preferences linked to application on his phone. His phone's connected to the infotainment system of the car. But the night before, he's been playing around. He's installed some new apps on his phone. And what he doesn't realize is one of those applications has a bit of a Trojan horse in it. So once the phone is connected to the infotainment system on the car, the Trojan horse that's now been installed on his mobile phone through the infotainment system, which sits on the vehicle bus, now has access to the whole periphery of the vehicle, all of the different elements within the car. So the cyber attacker that goes in through the Trojan horse that's in the phone app can now start doing lots of malicious things to the various elements in the vehicle. So the app, like I say, now has access to the CAN bus. The CAN bus controls the braking and the steering elements within the vehicle. So the vehicle is now potentially at risk. However, when the Trojan horse that's found its way into the vehicle attempts to try and access the memory of these critical systems. What you see when you monitor that really detailed level of the vehicle infrastructure is you see access of the memory, for example, say the braking system, being requested by the infotainment system. So is that a legal transaction? Well, in normal operation, you would never expect the infotainment system of the vehicle to want to go and access the memory within the braking system. So our on-chip monitor detects these communications and it knows that's not expected, knows that's an illegal transaction. So with that, it mitigates those transactions and will block them. So, so none of those requests from the infotainment system to access the memory around the braking system get through. So the attack is mitigated, and we're able to collect that data and we're able to send that up to the cloud. So we've got record of the sort of attacks that are occurring. So for our passenger, another happy, uneventful trip to work, completely unaware of what's gone on throughout the situation. And that's the way we like to see it. So we want to make sure that, like I say, the passengers and within the vehicle aren't affected by these types of incidents. So just talking about what we're doing within Siemens. So Siemens has an extremely wide range of technology that both on the manufacturing side, the functional safety side, the in-life monitoring, management and security. And we like to think that all of these elements of test, safety and security is really kind of embedded in our DNA and the way that we do things. So let's look at where we're going in the future. So software-defined vehicles are really starting to kind of become the next technology, the next level of kind of vehicle technology that's coming. But always remember, the software is only as good as the hardware it's built upon. So the hardware is really the cornerstone of everything that builds up a software-defined vehicle. And as more and more features and functionality get added to the software, the requirements around that hardware continue to explode in terms of the compute performance that's required. And as you know, with your phone and your PC, there's never a decrease in terms of hardware requirement. The hardware requirements are always increasing. And then especially when vehicles and safety are paramount, safety and security are really fundamental to the overall development of these software defined vehicles. So really critically important when we're developing the overall hardware for these vehicles of the future. So with that, I'll wrap up and just say one last thing. If the technologies you've seen just a glimpse of today are of interest, we've just published a very nice ebook that can be found on the Siemens website that goes into a lot of details for each of these different technology areas. So if you're interested, go take a look, drop me a line, and yeah, we can have a more detailed discussion. Thank you very much.
Lee of Siemens over in San Francisco Bay, thank you very much indeed. Before we hear from our next speaker, just to let you know that the next AESIN Tech Talk will be on Wednesday, the 20th of March, with Dan Fowler of Warwick University. The talk will be Project Res Auto, assessing capability enhanced microprocessors for future cyber resilient automotive systems. The next webinar from the IoT Security Foundation will be on Thursday, the 28th of March. The first confirmed guest for that one is Ken Munro of Pentest Partners, will present on aviation. If you're watching this live, the links to register for one or both of these upcoming broadcasts are in the Zoom chat facility. So we'll have a Q&A section soon. There's already plenty of questions coming in on the Zoom chat facility, but if you do have any questions, observations, comments, or whatever, do use the Zoom chat facility if you're watching this live, and we'll put those questions and comments to our speakers towards the end of the hour. Up next in this joint broadcast from AESIN and the IoT Security Foundation, it's Paul Wooderson of Horiba Mira, and he's going to be talking about hardware security. So now we cross over to England's Midlands. Paul, it's over to you, my friend.
Hi there, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll just share my screen with my slides, one moment. And hopefully they're coming through. Yeah, so I'm going to pick up on the theme of hardware security and how that applies to software-defined vehicles, as Lee's introduced us to just now. I'm going to cover a few things, just a little bit of background first to the cybersecurity challenge that we're facing in the automotive industry, some of the regulations and standards that we're seeing now and that we're all working with, and some of the practical challenges that we're seeing coming from those, and then moving on to look at how that drives the need for hardware security and the different types of hardware security that we have available, and then I'll wrap up with some takeaways and some points for further thought. So just by way of background, then, so what's driving our need to think about and consider cybersecurity for vehicles? Well, not surprisingly, and I think that Lee had some similar figures and trends in his presentation, that an ever-increasing proportion of the vehicle architecture is now made up of electrical and electronic components, and with that comes larger and larger numbers of microprocessors, microcontrollers in today's vehicles. So numbers, some sort of 50, 100, sometimes more than 100 of these devices, depending on the type of vehicle. And all of those microprocessors, of course, are running software, hence the trends towards software-defined vehicles. And we see numbers like 100 million lines of code in a typical modern vehicle, and that number's growing and growing as we add more of these features and the complexity that goes with those. And then beyond that, as we look towards more autonomous driving and automated driving systems, we're seeing increasing use of techniques like artificial intelligence-based techniques of various forms. Of course, everyone's talking about AI at the moment, not surprisingly, and we're of course using it to implement some of these automated features. And the key point there is that we're moving then from not just encoding all of our decision making in these hundreds of millions of lines of code of software, but we're also making these decisions based on data now coming from outside the vehicle, and we have to decide how do we trust that data coming from outside, and how do we trust the algorithms that we're using to process that data and to make those decisions. So this challenge, this increasing complexity, is leading to challenges around the risk of those technologies from that complexity, and one of those areas of risk, of course, is cybersecurity. And looking at what the concerns we see today, so sort of starting with some of the real world examples of typical cybersecurity concerns. Not surprisingly, of course, the first area we've really seen this is in the area of vehicle theft, moving very much from a historical physical security problem to very much a cyber security problem today. So many of us will have seen the various news reports over the last years about vehicles being stolen by relay attacks on keyless entry systems. More recently, vehicles being stolen by car thieves using devices that attach to vehicle network wiring from accessible points on the bodywork. It's very much in the cyber realm, vehicle theft today. And that's shouldn't surprise us. There's of course clear financial motivations for the attackers, the car thieves who are perpetrating these thefts, and that's always the area that we see first with security. Also entering the public awareness more and more now is the privacy aspects and how they connect to cybersecurity. So in Lee's nice example just now of the guy with his software-defined vehicle on a journey, connecting his phone, and of course, as soon as we connect our phones to the vehicle, we're then exchanging data with the vehicle. It downloads our contact details. Our vehicles can contain our locations and our driving destinations in the navigation system. We have connected services through which we're interacting between the vehicle and being able to control it potentially from a smartphone, and this has led to a number of sort of questions and that are now very much in the public awareness around how do we delete our data from a vehicle that we might be selling on to another owner, or maybe when we give back a rental car, how do we make sure our contact details have been removed if we've paired a phone to it. And also this article in the background is a few years old now. It was a bulletin from the National Cybersecurity Centre highlighting and raising awareness of the need to be aware that used connected cars may still need disconnecting from the previous owner. So how do we make sure that the next vehicle we're buying, the second-hand vehicle we're buying, doesn't still have the previous owner connected to its connected services? So all sorts of areas now that are very much sort of in the public awareness. The third one on here, the safety side of cybersecurity, this of course is of critical importance, and it's already now quite a few years ago that this incident that here in this news article was reported to researchers in the US back in 2015. That they basically demonstrated through some research they'd done on this vehicle that they could find a way to remotely access the vehicle through its infotainment system, and then through exploiting a series of vulnerabilities, take control over its steering and brakes. And of course, this is an area of huge concern because of the potential safety impacts and what's driving a lot of the activity today. Fortunately, at least as far as we know, we don't see too many of these real incidents. There have been mainly research demonstrations so far. There have been other research demonstrations as well as this one over the years that these kind of remote attacks with safety impacts are at least feasible, and we should be taking care of them. And this leads us to really a sort of look at how security needs to be thought about for any kind of cyber physical system like a vehicle, but equally other types of cyber physical system like medical devices and industrial control systems. Until now, sort of computer security that we might all be familiar with from the IT world is very much focused not entirely but largely on confidentiality. How do we protect our assets, our data, from unauthorized access and disclosure? How do we keep our personal details secret? How do we stop our PIN numbers and bank account details being disclosed to people who shouldn't have them? But as we think about now cyber physical systems where we have computing devices, onboard vehicles that can potentially control the physical behavior of the vehicle, this now means that a failure in security of one of these electronic systems can now lead to injury or loss of life. And that tends to mean, if we look at that in terms of this security properties triad of confidentiality, integrity and availability, it actually means the availability and integrity properties are now much more important to us than they perhaps have been before, and we need to make sure our engineering processes can help us with the integrity and availability properties, not just confidentiality. So a little bit of a timeline, won't dwell too much on this, but this area in the automotive world, or automotive cybersecurity, it's been developing over actually quite a long time. So even back as far as 2008, we can see examples of both research demonstrations where vulnerabilities have been discovered in vehicles, and also industry activity that's emerged from some early research projects, such as the Avita project that's mentioned down there back in 2008 to 2010, in which our organisation was involved, all the way through to the development today of standards and the emergence of regulations over this long period of time, as it's come very much into a sort of mainstream automotive engineering discipline. So just a quick look at those, some of the key standards and regulations in this area. These may be not a surprise to many of you. We now have regulations that cover a large proportion of the world. Those who adopt the UNECE type approval regulations. We now have a regulation for cybersecurity regarding type approval, and a companion regulation 156 for software updates. And these have been enforced now for nearly 2 years, and apply to all new vehicle types that are going to be put on the market. They have to meet these requirements before they can be given type approval. And from July this year, they'll actually now apply to all newly registered vehicles, including those that were already developed and on the market. So the regulatory regime is sort of well established now for cybersecurity and software updates. We also have supporting the meeting of the compliance with those regulations. We have now international standards for both subjects: ISO SAE 21434 for cybersecurity and ISO 24089 for software updates. Again, both have been around for a little while. The industry's now making great strides in implementing the requirements of those standards throughout the supply chain, actually, not just the vehicle manufacturers, but the supply chain as well. They're a first set of standards covering a new area, so not surprisingly, there's a number of gaps still to be filled, and those yellow areas at the bottom of the slide there that pointed to some new additional standards documents that are in development now. So we have 2 new cybersecurity documents being developed in ISO and SAE, covering cybersecurity assurance levels and verification and validation. So hopefully providing some key additional guidance to the industry. And similarly, on the software update side, there's some new standards coming to improve the guidance in that area as well over the next year or two. There's much more, and of course, beyond these standards, we have regulations coming out in other parts of the world as well. There's a significant number of regulations coming now applicable in China that cover similar areas, and also some additional ones. We have the Cyber Resilience Act in the EU that's going to apply to some areas of relevance to the automotive sector. So it's an increasingly complex regulatory and standards landscape to grapple with. With all of this, of course, comes a need to invest really quite heavily in for a lot of organizations to be able to perform all these activities and maintain cybersecurity and realize all the requirements over actually very long vehicle lifetimes. Multiple decades is now what the obligations extend to, and the big question now, I think, is as we see these standards and their requirements and people putting them into practice is how do we start to scale this up? So we've now seen many sort of first rounds of vehicles type approved under the new cybersecurity regulation, and as this grows to more and more vehicles, how do we scale this up, given that we have a relatively limited resource pool in this area, and how do we make sure we're adding value in terms of real security at a technical level, and not just reducing all of this to a pure compliance activity. So we need compliance, but what we need, we need the actual security that goes with it. So this means how, moving from activities that are basically counting large numbers of things like vulnerabilities in Excel sheets to more scalable approaches to keeping on top of the sort of emerging threat landscape and the emergence of new vulnerabilities. How do we do that in a more scalable and smart way, so that we can move the discovery of vulnerabilities earlier and do it at a practical level. In terms of vulnerabilities, so some interestingly similar statistics, if we look at some of the quotes coming from the likes of Microsoft and Google and even others, have all typically found, when they've looked across their sort of software product and reported vulnerabilities that they see, a fairly consistent number of around 70% of these vulnerabilities or security bugs are typically related to memory safety problems, and this is just a really interesting statistic, and particularly how common it is. And what we might consider is how does this apply to automotive vulnerabilities? So we have obviously very different systems of very different natures in vehicles, and very diverse types of system, ranging from relatively small resource constrained embedded ECUs up to very complex multi-core infotainment systems with complex operating systems on them. How do these kind of statistics translate into our world? And maybe the data pool is still a little bit limited, but we may expect to see similar kinds of numbers. And one of the options and one of the solutions to this is basically how can we use hardware security to help us with avoiding these kind of software security issues. We can spend a lot of time making the software better and trying to eliminate all of the vulnerabilities and bugs in the software. But actually, all of that software, as Lee mentioned in his presentation, is running on hardware, and good overall system security relies not just on the software, but we need to have a trusted hardware foundation that we can rely on and build good software on. And we see some examples of this already. They're already quite prevalent in the automotive world. We have hardware security modules now built into many automotive microcontrollers. So based on either the SHE specification by AUTOSAR or more sophisticated HSMs, hardware security modules with programmable cores. And these are becoming quite commonplace now and used to implement security controls like secure boot and secure onboard communications for protecting the onboard network messages. And they've been around for actually quite a long time. They were actually proposed way back in around 2010 in that Evita project that I mentioned. This one of the parts of it was a specification for a hardware security module, but it's only now that we're starting to see them actually getting into production vehicles. So that's quite a lot. Maybe a 14-year incubation time or industrialization time, however you want to look at it, that it takes to get something from that sort of concept level through to widespread usage. There are other forms of hardware security as well, including the technologies Lee was talking about, the monitoring analytics. These are all providing sort of trustworthy hardware. One thing we also need to think about with all of our hardware mechanisms is these mechanisms can also be subject to attack. How do we make sure that the attackers then don't just turn their attention to breaking the hardware features? And if we think about hardware security modules again, the next step basically, and it's starting to be discussed and considered for automotive HSMs, is how will the attacker basically circumvent the protections provided by that module? How might they use things like side channel attacks to reveal the cryptographic keys that are used and enable them then to do the original attacks that those hardware security modules were protecting against? So it might mean that the attacker can basically break the secret key, bypass maybe a code signing mechanism, and then go on to be able to flash malicious software again. It might mean they can overcome the authentication mechanism on an onboard network and inject messages again, etc. So these kind of attacks sort of emerged from, they're very commonplace in things like payment cards and pay TV scenarios, but as we also start to put cryptography into other types of system like vehicles that are often in sort of undefended environments, they start to become relevant here as well. And as a result, we're developing new guidance in a new SAE document now, this J3101-4 on resistance to side channel attacks in automotive applications. So that's one example of how we're looking at sort of hardware security and the security of hardware security, if you like. Another kind of hardware security mechanism that's gaining increasing traction at the moment is these cherry technologies. So this is capability architectures for microprocessors. It's a technology that's been developed by the University of Cambridge, and it's now being moving towards greater industrialization through a UK funded R&D program, the Digital Security by Design program. And that's funding a number of projects, including some that are focusing quite closely on the automotive area, including the Auto Cherry projects that is reaching its endpoint, and also another one which Chris mentioned a little bit earlier, the Res Auto project, which is just starting. And then there's a number of other kind of projects at different levels, including this one at the bottom. The CAPT project is a project we're advising on, run by the University of Birmingham, to look at how these kind of capability architectures interact with things like trusted execution environments. And what we've also seen in the last days is this program, which is sort of originates in the UK. These architectures were developed in the UK. It's now being recognised in this report that's just come out from the White House in the US about moving towards more secure software, recognising the need for trustworthy hardware to rely on, and these Cherry instruction set extensions are cited in this report even as well. So just to wrap up then, so all software, including automotive software, needs a trustworthy hardware foundation to rely on it. We can't have secure software without also having secure hardware. We've seen in terms of getting this hardware into vehicles, it's taken a long time. It took automotive HSMs, maybe around 15 years, depending on how you count it, to transition from early R&D to production vehicles. So we might think about what kind of sort of interventions are needed in terms of getting these hardware technologies to a similar level of adoption. If new hardware techniques come out today, how do we need to get those into a position where they can be implemented on an industrial scale? Do we need sort of do they need to be driven by standards? Is it an industry issue? Are there supply chain implications? Number of questions there. And also not forgetting how will these techniques be attacked? We can't just implement them and they'll fix the problem. We should need to think about how they'll be attacked themselves and how we need to defend them. So with that, I'll leave it there and back to Chris. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul Wooderson of Horiba Mira. So a bit of quick breaking news from the IoT Security Foundation. There are currently 3 IoTSF chapters, one in Bucharest, one in Houston, Texas, and one in Bangalore. And next week, there will be a new 4th one announced. I'm sworn to secrecy on the specifics, but look out for news of a new IoTSF chapter coming very soon. Right, let's continue with today's Q&A section. Gents, have you guys got an extra 10 minutes? Because it's now 4 minutes to the top of the hour, or 4 minutes to the top to the half hour if you're in India.
Maybe do
to get through as many
5 minutes, maybe.
as possible. Okay, we'll go for an extra 5 minutes. I'll ask this one first. I'll ask the questions in the order that we got them. This one's from Chris. How do things like Android Auto and Apple CarPlay fit into these representations? Lee, I think that one was for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of that comes down to partitioning in the software, and I know so there's a number of aspects to that. So one is you've got Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, but there's also a dedicated version of Android. There's Android Automotive, which is it's gone through all of the various security standards. So it's got a very limited amount of applications. But kind of going back to the question, it's a case of partitioning the software to try and make sure that it's kind of partitioned so that those functions don't get access to the main elements of the vehicle. So and again, we can do a certain amount of protection against that within the hardware, but we're very much reliant on the software architecture, and the Cherry architecture again is key to that, because you can be running on a common CPU, but because the different tasks that are running on that CPU are pigeonholed into secure sections of memory, there's no chance that you kind of get bleed through between the different activities from the secure kind of memory sections from one to the other. So but yeah, that is a big risk, and like I say, you've got a completely non-automotive qualified application then getting access to your system. So there's some thinking that needs to be done in terms of the software architecture.
Okay, Paul, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I was just thinking it reminded me of your hardware, your Trojan horse example, Lee, earlier. You know, that if that kind of sandboxing and or partitioning is done right, you can, you know, potentially avoid those kind of issues where you've got sort of Trojan horses or other kinds of malware brought in from sort of non-automotive qualified devices into the vehicle system, I guess.
Okay, and I think just to add to that, I think what you see and what we've seen with some of the research work we've done is for kind of OEM based equipment, that's done very, very well. So the risks are really well defined and mitigated against. The problem comes is if you've got a vehicle that maybe doesn't support Android Auto or CarPlay. So you go and buy a third-party head unit where you're not 100%. You don't really know where some of the technologies come from. You plug that onto your CAN bus. It may not have the same levels of security as essentially an OEM product. So you're really opening up the car network to some kind of really unknown potential for attack.
Not so much a question, more an observation. This is from Anapam. All the things you mentioned could be applied to a smartphone as well. So in a way, we can say we are in the smart cars era. We've also got, this is a question, I'll put this to you both. Hezemeldin, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Do we need to have a top-down approach for security testing? And if yes, how to leverage model-based system engineering for this purpose? Paul, I'll come to you for that one first.
Yeah, it's a good question actually, and security testing is a huge area. We've not really touched on it much so far today, but the challenges there are basically the practicalities are we can't test exhaustively everything for security because we're basically testing in an infinite space. So we need approaches to make sure we're putting the priorities on testing the right things, using things like risk-based approaches, and I think model-based approaches are part of that solution as well. So how can we use the information we have from our engineering activities to reason about and defend how we've chosen what to test and how, and that whole area I think is very much in the early stages of coming up with defendable ways that we decide where to put our efforts with security testing, and moving away from an approach where we just try and test what we can in a fixed penetration testing window or something like this. So I think there's a huge role for things like model-based security testing to develop.
Lee, I'll ask this one to you next. This is from Paul, and this question contains a lot of esoteric terminology, so I hope I'm not going to embarrass myself here. What is the state of play regarding CITS, i.e., safety and other applications building on V2V and V2I messaging?
So we're still at I guess we're still at a very early stage, and this is, I guess, one of the massive challenges for security, because if you think about it, I mean, Paul talked a lot about some of the regulations, so the UNECE stuff, which really regulates how you do software communication, software updates with a well-defined known source. So when your car does an over-the-air update, it's coming from the vehicle manufacturer's service. So a lot of V2X stuff, as we move into the future, so not only will your vehicle be communicating kind of back to the mothership as such to get software updates, we're now starting to talk to infrastructure. So you might be talking to a car parking structure or traffic management infrastructure, and there you run the risk of this is a really open area for attackers, because if you think, like I say, you could be communicating with a car parking structure. Actually, if an attacker comes along and spoofs a car parking structure, there's a whole new security challenge around that. So, and that's still quite in the early stages, because like I said, the regulations are there for over-the-air updates, but we're only just kind of getting into the world of talking to all of these other things. So like I say, smart road signage, talking to other vehicles, and like I say, it becomes really easy to spoof these things. And if you mean, you can go on and kind of Google spoofing, and you can see some really smart ways people are trying to manipulate these attacks. I mean, I've even seen one. It wasn't even kind of spoofing the communication. It was if you take a camera, your vehicle camera that's looking for road signs as a communications element. I've seen a case where there was a drone, and the drone was projecting a road sign on a white wall as such. So as the car drives past, it thinks the speed limit changes to, okay, now I can now do 70 mile an hour in a 20 mile an hour limited zone. So you're starting to spoof and confuse all the elements of the communication. So I think this is an area there's going to be a lot of effort spent on kind of going forwards.
I have to apologise to everybody who's asked questions, but no, we'll not be getting an answer, I'm afraid, because we are out of time. I'm sorry to say. Thank you to everyone for watching today. You can register for the next AESIN Tech Talk via the link in the Zoom chat facility, and register for the next IoT Security Foundation monthly webinar also via the Zoom chat facility. The link is there. The AESIN 2024 conference takes place in July. Go to aesin.org.uk/conference for details. The 10th anniversary IoT Security Foundation conference takes place in October at London's IET. Look out for further details of that soon. But that's it for today. My thanks to Paul, and my thanks to Lee as well. I actually made it through this broadcast with a heavy cold, so I'm actually quite proud of myself. But thank goodness that is over. But anyway, again, thank you very much to Lee in the USA, Paul is in England, and for myself, Chris in Bonnie, Scotland. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chris.